This podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only and does not replace independent professional judgment. Land Gorilla Inc. makes no representations, warranties, or promises for and disclaims any express or implied warranties related to content. Before acting on any information, you should consider the appropriateness of the information as it pertains to your unique business needs. Hello, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Jamie Lee, and this is the Construction Lending Podcast, where we share information, trends, and best practices around all things related to construction financing. I'm excited to host today's episode to discuss a very important topic for construction lenders, especially for those that lend in multiple states. And that is understanding the nuances of state statutory requirements and how to balance a lender's risk versus adding borrower friction to the process. We will review some of the complexities of state statutory requirements and introduce a brand new resource for lenders. To walk us through this exciting information, we are joined by Land Gorilla's founder and CEO, Sean Faries. Sean, we are glad you can join us today.
Thanks for having me.
So Sean, this is your first time at our new construction lending podcast. To start, can you give our listeners a little background on your experience and what led you to start Land Gorilla?
I don't think we have enough time to go through the reason why we started Land Gorilla, but the short version of that is we saw a huge problem in construction lending, and how complicated it can be. And one thing you may not know about me is I grew up in a family that had dinner conversations around construction lending and just lending in general. Primarily coming from my father, who impressioned a lot of that on me from a very young age. So one of my very first jobs was doing construction draw inspections as a sophomore in high school, driving all over the county with a Polaroid camera. If that ages me a little bit, but some people may not know what a Polaroid camera is. But pen and paper, and I'd mail in the inspection report and take my photos from my Polaroid camera. And that's how I, got started. Flash forward. As we get into this age of disruption and digitization, we really saw an opportunity to solve some really complicated problems with construction lending. So my history in all of this is, probably founded from a very young age, and my fascination with being able to solve some of these problems has just led us here.
Sean, we recently had a Land Gorilla client on the podcast for Security Bank, and they actually address that Land Gorilla is their best partner to help them solve problems. So hearing that you established Land Gorilla for that purpose, I think you can say that you have gone that way. And Land Gorilla is continuing to help clients, because I hear that you recently launched, or Land Gorilla recently launched, a new state resource website for construction lenders. Can you tell me a little bit about that? What does it include, and what led Land Gorilla to invest in creating this resource for lenders? And I believe it's not just for Land Gorilla clients. I believe it's for everyone.
Yeah, lots to unpack there, and I think it's, when you think about, your customer and you think about clients, it is definitely an honor to be thought of that way. And there's a lot of recognition by the people that were involved in that. And, the entire Land Gorilla team that, really, invokes that mantra of being a good partner. And that makes me really proud to hear that they considered us to be one of their great partners. That's exciting to hear. As far as the launch of this new resource center, it is, exciting to see that come to fruition as well. And, if you don't know, I hope you know by now that in addition to all of the complicated requirements that lenders go through to close just a regular mortgage, let alone a construction loan, you start to layer in, all the loan program guidelines and the internal best practices, and the construction, covenants under the construction loan agreement and provisions under the construction contract. And, you think you're crossing the finish line, understanding, all the basics there. As you start to dive into the statutory requirements, that's where things get really interesting. And, being Land Gorilla, being here at Land Gorilla, we've really had to invest over the years into understanding what those requirements are on a much more granular level. And granular level being, what are these states, what's required in each state? What do they ask for? What are the troubles and pitfalls you can get yourself into? So launching of this new state resource center for compliance, is absolutely essential for construction lenders, especially if you lend outside of your state and call it your own backyard. If you're lending outside of that and, have team members that need to know this information, these resources are just so valuable to have a easy place to go to find out what the statutory requirements are for lien waivers. Are they required to be notarized? What's the summation of the lien law? Can a mechanics lien have priority over our construction mortgage? What do I need to do in this situation is what it's trying to solve for. So, having that resource now available online to, anybody on the web can go visit there. There's no paywall up, which we think was a really great decision and really, really important for us to just make this information available to the world. It's already there, but this kind of helps take some of the legalese out of what is being said in some of these states and put it in, terms that can be understood. And, hopefully more people are able to make faster, safer, and more efficient construction loans as a result of it.
I've had the opportunity to view the state resource website, and I think it's fantastic. Your Land Gorilla team did an amazing job. For those listening today, each state seems like it has its own unique differences. What are common risks for construction lenders?
What are common risks for construction lenders? They're huge. So, for sake of that question, I'll just kind of ignore the obvious of what, things in the construction loan agreement or over dispersing a loan or some of the basics there. But, the way I think about that is, what are the implications? And I think the implications could be the worst imaginable. That being that, if a construction lender is making a construction loan, right? They have the property as collateral and they have the holdback as, a mechanism to safeguard their investment and their collateral, right? So, what's the worst thing that can happen? There's no collateral, there's no money, it's a total loss. So those are the implications, and lenders should, understand that when they get into this business, is that the implications can be huge if you're not following the law and you're not abiding by, what's expected for a construction lender in a particular state.
So, Sean, we talk about these common risks. Are there some less commonly known risks that construction lenders should be aware of?
Less commonly known. So I love the iceberg analogy when we think about risk and especially mechanics liens. And the way that would help somebody visualize this is, imagine you're, out in the ocean and you see this big iceberg, floating out of the water, and it has this peak, right? And what we see coming out of the water, that's the known risk, right? That is that's what we can see. That's great. That's what we understand. But with construction lending, especially with mechanics liens and lien rights, it's not the stuff that we can see that should worry people. It's the stuff underneath the surface that we can't see. And usually that's, 3/4 of the mass is under the water. When we think about that, is there's a whole lot of risk that that there's not a lot of, visibility into. So the more we can understand, what that risk is and how to mitigate it, the better off we all are. So thinking about, well, what are some of those things that, what's the low hanging fruit we could educate ourselves in? I'd probably say the easiest one, in statutory compliance, the most basic is probably lien waivers and understanding the requirements of that state. And I'll give you this example. Lenders see a lot of lien waivers, so they should see a lot of lien waivers. And some of them are generated by different systems, and contractors and builders download them from the internet. And what you should be concerned with is, a good amount of states have statutory lien waivers. Those lien waivers could be, implied to be suggested to use this lien waiver, or it should contain, these points within a lien waiver. And some of them are use this form or else, meaning, hey, if you don't use this specific, form with this particular language on it, it's not recognized by the state. So when you think about that, and you think about, and we see it all the time, where a contractor's using a specific software program, and or a HUD consultant generates it on a lien waiver on a form that was provided by HUD for a state that does not recognize it. I'd say that's probably the basics that you can catch. Is always just make sure that the right forms are being used and they're filled out correctly, and the correct amount and the correct information. I think that can go a long, long ways.
Sean, I have the privilege of meeting with a group of lenders pretty much on a monthly, bi-monthly basis. And you said some of the key words that is always said in every single meeting or masterminds that we have. And it's lien waivers, it's HUD consultants, it's forms. It just makes me wonder, with your years of experience in construction lending, what are one of the worst things that you've seen happen to a loan, and could it have been avoided? I know during these sessions that I have with these lenders, there's a lot of mishaps when it comes to, like you mentioned, filling out proper forms, not submitting proper documentation, it causes conflict between them, the borrowers, and the contractors when things are delayed. So, what have you seen from your experience?
Answering that from my perspective, I've seen, I don't even want to jinx myself and say, yeah, I've seen it all. Because that's normally when something pops up out of the blue and it's like, wow, weren't expecting that one. I think the best, the best defense at the end of the day, is always to be curious. Love the scene in Ted Lasso, where they're throwing darts. Jamie Lee, have you ever seen that scene in Ted Lasso?
Sorry, no.
Oh, unbelievable movie. Now you got to go out and watch it. But
I do.
He makes this great point just to always be curious. And there's a lot of emotion wrapped up in that scene, tied into people, judging or not being, what he says, not being curious, right? And I think that curiosity can go a long, long way in playing good defense and trying to, never, judge and never assume, and just always be curious, and always be empathetic to, the parties that are involved. And in this business, the stakes are high. And, for a lot of us, in this industry, we're really helping families. You got to keep your eye, on that ball, because, especially in the residential side just dominates what we see out there. And, by helping construction lenders that are making these loans, and we're putting people in homes, right? And in doing so, stakes are just so high for for the owner, for the people that are going to live there, for the contractor and builder who are doing this for a profit, so they can feed their families. Like just these, when you start touching people's money and you start touching people's homes, like the just emotion runs so high, and delays in payment. You think about delays in payment or delays in people being able to move to that home. That's the thing that we really have to, just constantly, keep in the forefront of, we're trying to help. We're not trying to hurt. You think about doctors do no harm. Same thing goes here. And all the little things that we do to help lenders to, mitigate that risk and protect that risk, and owners protect their, their assets and all of this, such a fine balance of, that, we call it, friction, right? And efficiency, right? So how do you have this fine balance of making sure that, the risk is mitigated properly, but it's not making somebody do these tasks that just have no bearing on something. Oh, you need to go have this notarized, or we need to delay your payment for 5 days because we need to do X, Y, and Z. And, so, always just keeping that in the back of your mind that everything that happens here has this impact on, a family and, businesses. And it's just so important to keep just a nice balance of, what's required and building it in the most efficient way that, people can do what they need to do without us getting in the way.
Sean, you said something that really resonated, and I want to repeat it again. You said the stakes are high, and I cannot emphasize that enough. And you saying that, with every delay just causes more delays in getting somebody into their dream home, in achieving that American dream, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many players when it comes to construction lending, from processing draws to getting, the contractors paid. Do you frequently see state statutes updated that could affect all of those players, the lenders, the borrowers, the third party companies that's also assisting, such as maybe title companies?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that often? And if you do, or if you don't, how are they notified? How do they know that there's this update?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think it's somewhat relative, so, when we do see changes on a state level, we see things differently, right? So, if you're doing a lot of consumer construction lending, you can see loan programs change, and there's pretty good notice, between Fannie and Freddie and HUD and USDA and VA, and there's a lot of great notices that are sent out, and they're pretty well received, and you can go subscribe. That's great. When we get into state level issue, a little more complicated, right? You can have your in-house counsel or your attorney subscribe to something like LexisNexis to keep an eye on what's passing through legislation. On a state level, it can be tracked, and I think we see changes. We definitely see changes. They're not at a pace where, hey, there's 10 changes at different times through the year. They're not that frequent, but they're definitely impactful. I want to say it was in 2021-ish. God, I can't say off the top of my head, but I know Texas went through a big overhaul. And chased a bunch, notice requirements, whether lien waiver forms, there were one of 3 states that require notarization on lien waivers, and that's no longer there, right? So a lot of great positive changes came out of that. You have definition changes, but it's really important to stay on top of them, because when they do change, you got to know, and not knowing, God, why do I want to quote G.I. Joe right now with knowing is half the battle? So I know it sounds dumb, but it is so true, the things we learn, as kids growing up, and that one sticks with me. So we have a lot of changes that are monitored, and that's a really important part of this process.
I just have to know, Sean, through this entire process of getting the state resource website up, what is one of the most interesting state regulations you've learned?
Oh, that is a loaded question. There's so many of them. Florida has a disperser's notice that you have to send out with each time you're making a disbursement, right? And I want to say the implications in Florida for not sending that out are about, I want to say it's 15,000 per time that you didn't do it. That adds up. That gets really expensive.
Wow.
Could
you repeat that again, Sean? I'm sorry. I just want to make sure our listeners hear that. Can you repeat what that penalty is again?
Oh, now I got to be absolutely sure. But in the state of Florida, if you're not sending out what's called a disperser's notice, it has implications and penalties. And don't quote me on it, but I want to say it's about 15,000 per disbursement if you don't send it out. So per violation, it's about 15,000. For construction lender, you've got the Section 22 affidavit in New York. You've got the original contractor's affidavit in Ohio that needs to be notarized. It's an affidavit, so it has to be notarized by the contractor at each draw. You've got appointment of mechanics lien agents in North Carolina and Virginia. You've got a couple other, state systems that require registration, tracking, various lien waivers. The list really goes on. Is there one that stands out? All of them. All of them keep me up at night. Make sure.
That's funny.
And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to make this, available is, the stakes are high. We don't want to put this behind a paywall and just say, hey, it's ours and nobody else can have it except for us. I think that's irresponsible on our end to try to, hoard that information. I think that, whether you're a client of Land Gorilla or not, what makes us stronger is this knowledge and being able to access it easily. I think that's the biggest benefit. Otherwise, if you don't have something like the resources that we're providing, you got to go find the state. You got to find the state statutory information to begin with, which is tough. And then within that body of work, you got to go find your subjects, right? Mechanics liens and mortgages, and, contractor information on licenses. You got to go hunt that information down, and then you got to try to understand legalese. The way attorneys write is different from the way that, us normal people, with my air quotes, tend to write, that should be generally understood. So we try to help make sure that when this is interpreted by, people within Land Gorilla or attorneys, that it's digestible. It's easily accessible. It's digestible. Here's the important stuff we need to know, because it makes, it makes our industry function better. And the more successful construction loans they are, the more we solve the housing problem that we're seeing. So, I just hope that, people find value in this, and, that it can be appreciated for what it is.
Sean, Land Gorilla released a state resource website. You're hosting a series of state-specific webinars. The first one was focused on Texas and was held on September 27th. The webinar is available on demand, and the link to view the webinar is in the episode show notes. Sean, could you share with us or give us a little preview of what you covered?
Yeah, well, that was a really exciting webinar, and it was the first of hopefully many to come. And Texas, just such a fascinating state. It, really, in all reality, acts as its own country, and it does things differently than really what you see in any other state. we got to cover just about every, concept you can with that webinar in Texas, ranging from, construction pre-start and the way construction loans should be closed, disbursement notices and disbursement statements, the statutory, holdback in Texas. There's a statute that requires the owner hold back 10% of the construction contract at each disbursement. We get into the notice of commencement, although it's not required to be filed, the benefits of requiring it and how it produces positive outcomes in addition to the notice of completion. And again, why that it's really, really important that lenders cause that to be filed, because it sets the start date for the 30-day hold period before you release the final disbursement. So just really working through a lot of complicated concepts. I thought Texas was just a great example of how all of this information just starts to come together for construction lenders to use. So, it sets off this stage that we're going to be able to do this now in the next few states, and hopefully more and more lenders find this information valuable. So we're really looking forward to producing a series of these webinars that really deep dive into how to make a construction loan in those states and, be really efficient at doing it.
It seems like you covered quite a lot in that webinar. So for anybody listening today, right after this podcast, look at the show notes on this episode and watch that webinar immediately after this. Thank you so much, Sean, for all this great information. Like you used in your example, I know this is just the tip of the iceberg and you have so much more information to share. Do you have any final comments with regards to the topic we discussed today?
No, I think it's just, really important that, lenders approach state requirements with, having some valuable resources and, really understanding, don't just box check things and do them because you think that they're supposed to be done. Try to understand, why they're being done and what the implications are if they're not done. And I think that really at the end of the day helps produce better outcomes, better customer experiences, for all stakeholders. And, at the end of the day, understanding, what these requirements are and how to leverage them to your benefit, it solves the big problem, right? And, that's what we're all here to do is solve problems. So I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you so much, Sean. If any of our listeners have questions or comments for Sean, please feel free to reach out to us. We have a message line on the podcast page and we'd love to hear from you. Thanks again, Sean. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. Make sure to visit Land Gorilla's new state resources site at landgorilla.com/states. You can also learn more about how Land Gorilla Solutions can help simplify and streamline your draw disbursement process. Again, my name is Jamie Lee, and you're listening to the Construction Lending Podcast.